This evening, we're here for our part 2 or Save Our Sons program. This program initially started because we heard the concerns of our community. Our initial meeting was an opportunity to gather with those who had been affected by the loss of a child, a loved one, friend, or who knows someone who had been affected by a tragedy, to give testimony, share stories, and just work together for a healing process, healing for ourselves and for our community. I'm very fortunate to reconnect with some very exceptional individuals of the community. Lisa and I reconnected, and that was wonderful. I met lots of new friends. Brenda, and I'm sure you'll keep meeting. Dr. Rick Walsh is, not only does he talk the talk, he walks the walk, and so he's a man to be reckoned with. So I'm excited to hear what he has to say. I remember when I was a little girl, not too long ago, no, maybe a long time ago, there was this little poem we had about make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver and the other is gold. And I used to say that all the time, not really knowing about the weighting of it. But I said, let me look this up, because this is kind of what has happened with me recently. And when I looked it up, it talked about there being a circle and a never ending to it, and kind of that's the way it is when you have a friendship. It talked about putting your hands together and helping each other, and that really made me feel good, because virtually that's what this program tonight is describing what we're trying to do with the series. Our program is about National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, and it's in honor of B.B. Moore Campbell. She is an author, advocate, and co-founder of NAMI, which is National Alliance of Mental Health. This evening, we're going to celebrate, we're going to bring awareness, and we're going to provide supportive information to our community. So the action plan is here, and Lisa, could you come up and introduce Dr. Walsh? Thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. I'm Lisa Wilson with Flintridge Center, and Flintridge came to be a part of this at the invitation of Diane Walker from La Pinnarisca. We've worked together on a number of different community convenings in the past, and when she called to talk about this, it was a perfect fit for us, because Flintridge does a lot of work in the community, and we're the institutional home for violence prevention, and so it's very appropriate and something that we're very much interested in. And this population, for me personally, I have 4 sons, and so I think constantly about the dangers that face them just as they navigate their way through the city, doing just what young men do, going to work, going to school, just living their life, but there's still challenges. So this is something that's very important to me on both professional and personal level. So tonight we have a wonderful panelist, and I want to talk a little bit about some of them. I invited one of them to come see Shackelford, who is on my speed dial, and we call each other, and I can always get a laugh out of him if nothing else. He's great. He's done work at John Muir for 10 years now? 10 years. He's been at work on the campus of John Muir High School with mentoring and partnership for youth development, first-hand experience working with youth. And of course, our police chief, who just saw him last night. I'm just starting to see police people and just, starting to hang with the right folks, I guess. So he's here tonight, though, to share the police, his views, and also he shared some, personal views that he has and some material, something he's been reading and some thoughts he has. And then, of course, Rickey Pickens, who I call my little brother, and I see at work, and I treat him like a little brother, too, in all the best ways. And he's our Director of Prevention and Intervention at Flintridge Center, and so has a lot of information and knowledge to share about intervention. But before that, we're going to hear from Dr. Eric Walsh. We're very fortunate, I heard Dr. Walsh say this, and we have one of 3 cities in the state, that has our own health department. So we're a fortunate city, and we're fortunate to have Dr. Eric Walsh to lead that health department now, and he's going to come with us and share some information about youth and violence and the effects it has. So.
I know time is limited, so I won't be long, but I do want to highlight a few things. And when we talk about African American youth, and many times in particular African American men, young men, we know from a public health standpoint that if you're a black male in the United States, you're going to live, depending on where you are, 8 to 12 years less than the national average. Many times with chronic diseases the whole time, especially after adulthood, you're far more likely to be incarcerated during that time. And much more likely to have been raised in a family where you did not have a good relationship with your father. So when you start to look at that kind of constellation of issues, one of the things that I begin to look at is how do you, kind of addressing the question, how do we help African American youth? It's an interesting kind of problem, because when you just go back 50 or 60 years, the biggest threat, if you were an African American youth, was societal racism. It was legal racism. Most blacks lived in the South, where segregation was the law, and Jim Crowism was the law, and you were probably more likely to die at the hands of some vestige of that institution than anything else. What's striking as we look at what's happened in America is you're far more likely now to die at the hands of someone who looks just like you. So something's drastically shifted in America in the last 60 years. And 60 years, maybe a little less than 60 years even. And one of the things that happened, of course, is before segregation ended legally in this country, the black family was far more of an intact unit. One of the strangest things that happened as a result of kind of the end of that institution is that we watched the family disintegrate. Startling statistic is that 70% of all black babies will be born outside of wedlock. 80% of all black children will be raised at some point in a home where their parents aren't together. Now, a lot of people argue, it's overrated, these are modern families, don't worry about it. But in fact, we know that fathers are critical to the development of children. I was the medical director for the jail system, the county jail system for Orange County, California, on an interim basis. They pulled me because clearly nobody else wanted to do it, who worked for the county. And I can tell you, when I would do intakes, and as a doctor, I'm one of those hands-on type of doctors, so I would actually go do the intakes. I rounded on the entire female jail's medical ward every day, and on the high-risk and psychiatric male side. So I saw some of the most violent criminals the county had regularly. And I would ask them, what happened? Where was your life? Just because I figure I'm not gonna get another chance like this. So I would ask them, and almost to the letter, almost everyone you'd run into had either no relationship with their father or poor relationship with their father. When we start looking at African American youth and what needs to happen, one of the things that needs to happen is the black community is going to have to make a decision to go back to certain institutions that really supported our growth, development, and protection. The family is one of them. The church historically was one of them. And now that you see this disintegration around spiritual issues in our community, and again, it's a new time, it's a new era. Some people say it's just, the way it is. But in fact, the fact that there is no moral fiber being laid down in many ways. And I'm not talking, flashpoint political type of issues. I'm talking things like it's not right to take from someone else. I'm talking issues like you should respect women when you see them. I'm talking issues like, you shouldn't sleep with everybody you kind of run across. These are tough things to say, but in fact, when we look at the statistics, these are things that are happening. Where we see this, and we know this based on rates of syphilis, gonorrhea, the fact that right now the fastest growing group in the country that are HIV infected, are getting HIV infection, are African American females. So we're watching, and it's a warning to all of America, because we know that the most at-risk groups are the groups that are going to suffer first. But it doesn't mean that the disease isn't going to spread to the rest of the population. So black America is the canary in the coal mine. But as you watch these rates go up in black America, you watch every other ethnic group, white, Latino, all the rest of them, kind of follow suit. So it's important to every American, regardless of what you look like, that some of these problems really be addressed. So we definitely have to begin to strengthen fatherhood. There's a lot of resources. I was at Learning Works today, which is a great program over on the inside. First time since I've been with the city, I haven't been here quite 2 years yet. Phenomenal work they're doing over there, and we're going to support them in a lot of different ways. But one of the things that they told me is there's nothing for the young men. The young women can go to Planned Parenthood and get all kind of health care, they can get all kind of things. So they came to me and said, what can we do for the young men so that they learn some of these things? They're very concerned because there are many young men who haven't finished high school yet, but have already impregnated multiple women. And so they're saying, what can we do? And so I said, well, there's a lot we can do. One of them is we can come in there and do some campaigns and some education. But until we really reestablish the fact that certain things do carry a certain amount of, for lack of a better term, sacredness. And when it comes to producing children, there is a sacredness to that. And I don't mean it in a religious sense. I mean in the sense that if the process of building families isn't laid out right, families are going to suffer. When families suffer, the family unit is supposed to work as an insulation against trauma. If the family unit isn't functioning right, you're probably much more likely to be exposed to trauma. And what does trauma do? Well, the studies show us, and I'm sure that the presentation will give you some of this, but the studies show us that it actually increases disease risks, raising cortisol and cortisol-releasing hormone, levels of stress hormones that then make the body pro-inflammatory. And you walk around with stress on you all the time. And we know from some of the work I do and some of the presentations I do around violence, we know that just witnessing violence makes a child far more likely to commit a violent act, just seeing it. Also, if they're in an environment where they are raised afraid because of bullying and other things. So we've got to work on the family. We've got to work on certain key moral issues about respect for others. And I'll end with the last thing. There's a few other things I was going to talk about, but I know I want to make sure we get to the panel. And that is we also have to teach self-worth. A big part of the problem in our community is that when many of our young people look in the mirror, they're not happy. And that's for a lot of reasons. Now, that's not unique to black children. I mean, when I'm working in medicine, I've seen many beautiful young white and Latino girls come in and they think they're too fat, they're too skinny, they're too this, they're too that. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with them. So we live in a society where because everything is airbrushed, people's self-worth is hurt. And we live in a society that's become so materialistic, they think if you don't have a lot of money, you're not worthwhile either. And of course, Lil Wayne and Tiger and all the rest of them do a good job making sure you think that. But it's even worse sometimes, I think, for African American children. And the reason is I can tell you an experience of my own, and this was in my own family. I have an aunt who's like half Cuban and half Jamaican. And once I was in her kitchen, all by myself, minding my own business, and she walked to me and said, you'd be so handsome if you weren't so dark. Hold on. She married into the family. But, and that kind of thing stays with you. And it's not just that. I mean, every time you turn on the television, look at the images you get and look at what you're told. And never mind the fact that, in fact, in our society, sometimes you feel as if you're viewed a different way. That's a part of what has to be reversed now. James Brown did an incredible job when he made the song, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Because what people didn't understand at the time is he was fighting what 400 years of slavery had instilled in most of us, that inherently you're inferior. Inherently there's something wrong with you if you're black. If we're going to empower these children, not only do we have to do a lot of these other things, and there are a few other things I was going to say, we've got to get self-worth back. If I don't value myself, it isn't going to matter who I sleep with. If I don't value myself, it isn't going to matter what kind of drugs I try. If I don't value myself, I'm never going to respect a police officer or my teacher. And teaching children and finding a way for them to value themselves is one of the most important things we need to do now. And I'll close with this story that just working at the skills program this summer, I actually did 4 modules on drug prevention around marijuana predominantly and alcohol. And when I stood in front of one of the classes and I actually looked at some of the young people and said, look, I believe in you. I said, I'm the son of a single mother. There were 3 of us. I heard people whisper that her sons would never be anything. And I said, I'm here. I've got multiple degrees. God has blessed me to do well. And I said, I want to let you know something. You're no different than I am. I would have been sitting just where you're sitting almost. Except my mother would have killed me if I flunk out of school. I needed to be in summer school, so that's the difference, baby. But I want you to understand that if I could do it, you could do it. One of those young men came up to me after and was like, nobody's ever told me that. I've never heard that I'm worthwhile. Nobody's ever told me that, nobody's ever given me that example that I could do it. And I dapped him up and I said, listen, if you ever need me, I'm on North Fair Oaks, you find me. We have to begin the process. And that's one of the reasons why I really love the police department here. I see Chief Sanchez, the deputy chief here at all of these events. The young people know them, they see them, and the mentoring that is done through 2 of the organizations represented here, Rickey, Pickens at Flintridge, and the work that you're doing at John Muir. This is the kind of work that changes lives. There's no magic bullet. We can't sprinkle something in the water system in the city and all of a sudden everybody gets straight. It's going to take us impacting individual lives one at a time. That's hard work, but it's good work. And it is the work that we need to be doing. Thank you.
I want to give a couple of facts to sort of set the stage for what we're talking about and why this is so important. In the United States, youth 18 years and under represent 26% of the population, but the vast majority of them have been witness, I shouldn't say it like that, but account for 50% of the witnesses and victims of violence. So our young people are being exposed at a rate that's significant. Nowhere else is this happening at this level except in some other countries where there's war, civil war, and things like that going on. But our youth are being exposed at an extremely high rate to different types of violence, be it community violence, interpersonal violence, family violence, things of that nature. And in addition to that, African American youth are disproportionately exposed to higher rates of violence compared to any other adolescent group that we know. These youth are 10 times more likely to be victims of homicide. They're way more likely, I think in another study, they're 8 to 9 times more likely to witness some sort of violence in their community or in their family. And they also are more likely to be victims of child abuse and neglect for various reasons. So again, we're having our African American youth being overexposed to issues around violence. Again, whether it's in the community or in their families. So, it's important to understand when we're talking about violence exposure that there are consequences for our children being exposed to a lot of violence. It changes people. It changes children to be exposed to violence. It causes disruptions in their ability to function. In this case, we're talking about their psychosocial functioning. And it also impacts their growth. And I won't get into all this stuff about what goes on, but it has a tremendous impact on the development of children. Okay? And when you have groups of children who are overexposed, it has even more impact on their development, especially if there aren't a whole lot of other resources or they're already at risk due to poverty or other issues. To add violence to that becomes even a greater impact on them. So family and community violence exposure has been linked to a lot of psychological problems among youth of all ages. We talk about kids not being able to sit still in the classroom. In some public schools, about 30% of those children are sitting in the classrooms and have been diagnosed with ADHD, and they're really trauma-reactive kids. These are kids that are seeing a lot of crazy stuff going on in their lives. And they can't sit still. And if you can't sit still and pay attention, you're not going to be able to learn. So we have this tremendous achievement gap with African American children. Okay? One of the things that I found in terms of doing some of the research for my dissertation is that this trend of the achievement gap was even coming down up until the time we hit around the 80s, and all of a sudden we saw this big surge of a lot of violence, and now the achievement gap has started to grow again. Whether there's a direct link, we don't know, but it's definitely is a factor, and that's basically part of what my dissertation is saying, that we need to look at violence exposure and its role in academic achievement, in addition to poverty and all the other at-risk factors that people talk about. So kids who are exposed to community violence or to any kind of violence will develop psychological problems such as post-trauma stress disorder, which again has a lot of different types of symptoms, and one of those again is anxiety as well as developing depression. So again, if these types of symptoms follow that child throughout their development into adulthood, we now know that trauma plays a significant role in all adult mental illness. Okay, so when you're seeing folks who have mental illness or having a lot of mental health problems, you ask them the question, what happened to you? 9 out of 10 of them are going to tell you that they were exposed to violence at some point in their lives. And in particular, we're looking at childhood trauma. So youth exposed to family or community violence are vulnerable to disturbances in self-esteem, a lot of what Dr. Walsh talked about, in terms of their own identity, in terms of how they feel about themselves. It goes down when you're being exposed to violence. Issues of trust, ability to have interpersonal relationships, to have good peer relationships, their ability to control their emotions, and what we talk about emotional regulation, is impaired as a result of being exposed to chronic trauma and chronic violence, which creates trauma. So you can imagine when you accidentally bump up against a kid who's had a long life of being exposed to violence, they automatically interpret everything as a threat. And they're going to respond. How do you think they might respond?
Violent.
They're going to be violent or aggressive, because for them, even the accidents are threatening. okay? So a lot of these kids misread what's going on around them and interpret it through a violence lens, okay? And so that leads to more aggression, which leads to more violence, and the cycle gets worse. So, childhood trauma. And basically, when we're talking about childhood trauma, we're talking about trauma that occurs generally before the age of 6. Okay? Generally, by the time they get to around 6, between 6 and 8, kids sort of have formed their personality, if you will, for all intents and purposes, not to get into all the whole child development stuff. But they, you know, they have a sense of who they are on some levels. So when this childhood trauma hits them, it throws all of that off. All of that. Their what we call their developmental trajectory gets thrown out. So childhood trauma can occur when a child is exposed to extreme stress. So it doesn't have to be violence. It could be the loss of a parent. It could be living in a home where a parent is not available due to substance abuse, or not available due to mental illness, or there's domestic violence. And there's a lot of domestic violence in our community, unfortunately. So all of those things for a child are stressful and create a lot of stress reactions in that child. And then add violence to all of that, in addition, again, it's going to impair that child going forward. So even for young children, divorce can be a very stressful event, okay? And can cause some traumatic reactions. So nearly every researcher agrees that early childhood traumas lie at the root of most long-term depression and anxiety and many emotional and psychological illnesses. Again, Kaiser did this very famous study, looking at what we call adverse childhood events. And what they found is that all the child needs is about 4 to 6 events, and it's going to change their physical health. They're going to have more health issues. A lot of children who grew up with trauma end up with heart disease, okay? They may have other chronic illnesses such as diabetes, hypertension, even cancer is now being seen as being related to the amount of stress hormones that are released in the body. So if you have kids that are growing up in these very stressful environments for years, it's going to impact their health as adults. And again, that study is a very famous study that Kaiser did, and they're still pulling stuff out of that data about the impact. People that smoke cigarettes, I think, was one of the physical issues that came out for a lot of the people. And again, we're not talking about a whole lot of events. We're talking about 4 to 6, okay? So it doesn't take a lot.
4 to 6 negative events, you said?
4 to 6 adverse events. Okay? So prevalence estimates of post-traumatic stress disorder among urban youth who experience violence exposure rates anywhere from 24% to 34.5%. Some studies have shown that for African American youth, that the rate of post-trauma stress disorder is around 25% for urban youth. So this suggests that there's a considerable proportion of youth exposed to violence at significant levels for psychological trauma. So now, the link to gangs. Gangs and trauma go together. Research is starting to make that link and is showing that childhood traumatic experience will increase the risk of a child becoming involved in a gang. And again, it makes sense. Children who have been traumatized walk around with chronic fear and anxiety, and a gang can look like a place to go that is safe, okay? Because one of the things that gangs came out of is a way of providing protection to people in the neighborhood, all right? So it could be very appealing to kids to join a gang, again, from a trauma perspective. And then once the child is in the gang, they then experience even more traumatic events as a result of being in the gang, okay? And again, it's shown that they experience significantly more events, traumatic events, than their peers who are not in gangs. So again, why would children who have experienced violence and trauma already in their lives want to join a gang? One is for safety, or perceived safety, okay? Some of it is for identity, because again, one of the things that gets what's the best word to put it? Some of the things that get damaged is self-esteem and identity, which sort of go hand in hand. And so a lot of these children can look to a gang to get some of their identity and their self-worth. Because maybe I can't be large in charge over here, but through a gang, I can feel more powerful. I can protect myself better, okay? In a way, it can feel like it's an oxymoron because it doesn't. But the perception is that violence holds strength. And so when people have been involved in a lot of violence, they look to other people to be strong, that they can do things, that they can make changes, because violence does make changes. And so kids can be attracted to that. Just make sure I catch up.
Also, the gangs on teaching them the alphabet. If they don't know the alphabet, if they don't know the alphabet before they get to the gang, that's why they got to the gang. And then the gangs on going to school.
Right, again, these are kids that are sort of falling out of school,
Yeah.
falling out of the norm in terms of what society expectations are, because the trauma says that adults let me down.
Yeah.
They didn't protect me, therefore I have to do it myself. And that can happen through gang affiliation. So again, gangs can offer a sense of safety, control, structure, which is often missing in the lives of traumatized youth. Gangs can also provide a place for youth to repeat learned behaviors, such as violence. Youth may find some semblance of success through their gang affiliations, which you're not necessarily finding in the other parts of their lives. Again, it can also be an outlet for a pessimistic worldview. Many of these kids who've been traumatized don't feel that they have a future. Therefore, they're much more willing to gamble with their lives as well as anyone else's life. Okay? They have what is also called a truncated moral development. All right? Because of what has happened in their lives, they feel that they have a right on some levels to do bad to others because bad has been done to them. Okay? There's nothing there except to stop that child from, again, doing something to somebody else. I don't like me, therefore, how am I going to care about you? So we have people here that are going to talk a lot about gang interventions and things that they do, but there's been a shift in gang interventions in terms of law enforcement and those who are out there providing services. And that is because of this new research that has come about around childhood trauma. We're re-looking at what do we do in order to address gangs. The suppression doesn't work completely. It does work on some levels, but it is not the full answer to gang intervention. So, and again, it costs a lot of money to institutionalize all children who have done something or who have been violent. And a lot of those kids go in and come out more violent than they were before they went in. So that hasn't been found to be something that is good, especially on a long-term basis. The Congress had a committee decided to conduct hearings to examine the causes and cures for violent gang activity, marking a crucial turning point in the history of violent gang intervention. And so now what we're seeing is that there's this shift that now we need to deal in terms of prevention. We need to not look just at suppression, but we need to look at prevention. And what does that prevention look like? We need to take into account that a lot of these children who are involved in gangs have histories of childhood trauma, meaning that they need mental health services. Okay? So what we're looking at now is collaborative, comprehensive programs, typically include prevention, intervention, and suppression techniques, and hinge on the collective work of a variety of agencies, which includes the criminal justice system, social service agencies, mental health, as well as faith-based groups. So, healing interventions for African American youth exposed to violence. And again, this would be good for all youth who've been exposed to violence, not just African American youth. The number one role of a parent, even before love, is protection. That is the number one role of a parent with their child, is to protect that child. And again, as Dr. Walsh talked about, with the family sort of disintegrating, that protection is not there. Okay? And when children don't feel safe and protected, they're going to go somewhere where somebody offers them safety and protection. And it may not be who we want them to choose. It may be who they see as available. So protecting children with physical safety first, Emotional safety second, and that means not screaming, yelling, calling them little this and that, and all the things that we can do to our children. Does not create emotional security or safety for them. Giving them letting them know that they're important, and we do that by giving children attention. It's not enough just to say, okay, see ya, go ahead and do what you're going to do. We have to be present for children by giving them attention. That is the way that they know that they're worthwhile. If you're willing to not do this in order to be with them, the message that children get is that I must be worthwhile. Somebody cares enough about me to stop this to be with me. That is so affirming to that child and tells them how important they are, and again, raises their self-esteem. So, one thing that we can all do is every time we see a child is to affirm them. Say something positive to that child. Excellent thing to do. Very easy, all of us can do that. These are vital ways to help reduce traumatic reactions. Because again, you can't always protect a child from all trauma. I mean, stuff happens. But how we respond as adults to wrap them in our arms of protection is going to make the difference. Safe and trustworthy relationships. Can't say enough about that. Kids have to feel safe in their relationships, in their families, in their communities, in their schools, wherever they're at. They need to have safe and trusting relationships. Children learn from those relationships how to be in relationships with others, but then they also, again, reaffirm that they're worthwhile. If somebody cares enough about me, then I must be worthwhile, I must be lovable, and again, that helps with all the effects of childhood trauma. And it creates an environment where the brain can start to feel safe. Because again, when you've been exposed to trauma, especially for a child whose brain is still developing, the brain develops in a hostile world. The brain develops thinking that the world is hostile. And it's very hard, especially as a clinician, to switch that in the brain. It takes a lot of energy and long years to start to shift that, how the brain sees the environment as not being threatening. Okay? Then also, in particular, when we're talking about children of color, we need to make sure that whatever services are provided are culturally relevant. Okay? If they're not culturally relevant, one, they're not going to show up. Two, they're not going to participate if they do show up. And if they're forced to show up, well, we know how that tends to work. Those of you who work in organizations where kids are forced to be there. But when we make programs that are culturally relevant, that speak to who they are, that speak to their identity, they show up. Okay? So all of these programs have to be culturally relevant, whatever it is you're going to do, be it counseling or any kind of mental health services. In addition to that, services need to have a trauma focus. That doesn't mean you have to sit there and talk about trauma, but you need to the program needs to be designed to incorporate issues of trauma, because that's what's going on with these children. Okay, so I think that's it for me. So now we're going to have our panel.
Know that a job is not the answer to everything. So when we talk about the shift in intervention, it's really picking up from where Father Greg Boyle talks about in terms of kinship. And he talks about understanding each other in terms of being a part of one another. He talks about having two rivals working in the same t-shirt factory and build relationships with one another to the point that when they come out of the t-shirt factory that they still have those relationships. So that if something happens to either one of them, that they feel that pain and having that loss as if it was one of their brothers in that. And so I say I'm echoing the same thing today as a person who does intervention in the city. It's not where you're from, it's who you are. So it's not about neighborhood, it's about brotherhood. And when we begin to understand that type of kinship, then it crosses over who you are ethnic-wise, it crosses over what neighborhood you're from, it crosses over what school you went to. And so in seeing it work firsthand, even I like to appreciate the APF brothers who came out to see this panel discussion. A lot of the guys are here tonight who were involved who were once involved in that same thing in terms of being from a neighborhood, who said it's not where we're from, and these guys are from 4 to 6 different neighborhoods. And even sitting in this room today is probably 3 different neighborhoods who were once at war with each other. And so seeing these guys come here and hear this kind of panel shows that kinship, brotherhood really works. And so they said it's not about being a part of any gang, Rick. It's about standing up as black men in our neighborhood and not allowing those kind of traumas to continue to happen in our homes. So we're going back home and we're going to take care of our kids and make sure our kids get to school and create safe passages for other kids in our neighborhood, because that's what's important. And so having that, they have that common bond where a neighborhood would separate that. So now the common bond is we're all fathers, we're all men, and we all have made mistakes, so we need to correct our mistakes and get back to a place of doing what men should be doing. And so that's the shift, and that's what I think is important in terms of that wraps all this mental health things together. And they had to come together themselves mentally and say, hey, I've been doing this wrong too long. It's time to figure this thing out. And some of them had to come to grips, as one of our mentors in the group said, Paul, who had his own set of traumas, who said the thing that got him to do 25 years in prison is that he was traumatized as a little boy, because he was buzzed from the west end of Pasadena to the east end of Pasadena and seeing how the houses changed within that stretch, going from west to east, and then getting into a classroom and the teacher in the classroom treating him different from the other kids. So he had to come back and understand that and come to grips with that, to the point that now he can talk to other men who's a part of this brotherhood. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. So again, it sounds like relationships played a major role in the healing process. Now you hear from Chief Sanchez, who's going to speak from the law enforcement perspective.
Well, I hope so.
Oh, okay.
At least before I speak on the law enforcement perspective, though, I have to give you my personal opinion, at least based on historical data. And first of all, before I get started in that, I'll try not to take up too much time, because you're really going to want to hear from Shaq. But I think that you have to look at history as a yardstick about where we've come and where we might go, as a predictor of what our future might look like. And so before many of you were born, the United States of America was a centralized industrial state. And what that meant was that a young man could go to school, graduate with a C average, get out and go work for Ford Motor Company, make $33,000 a year, have 9 children, and retire, all based on the income made by Ford Motor Company. And as we started to move past the industrial evolution and started to go into outsourcing jobs, and we increased the market rate of margin for profit and gain, and these companies started to look at other areas in the world that they could get the same product for a reduced rate, we moved from an industrial state to a service state. And the problem isn't necessarily that we morphed into this more complex, high-speed, instant gratification world. The problem is that the mainstream structures that have supported that historically don't exist any longer. So for example, when I was a young man, if you knew how to read, write, and do basic arithmetic, you could go to work for Ford Motor Company. But now if you're not doing trigonometry or algebra, or if you're not in some kind of advanced AP class, by the time that you are in the 3rd, 4th, or 5th grade, and ladies and gentlemen, you know better than I, that's not an exaggeration, then you're already beyond the power curve. And when we look at the educational system itself, and I take a moment to point out 2 of my colleagues in the audience this evening, Deputy Chief Darrell Qualls, who has his master's degree. Commander Lisa Rosales, a Latina, who has her master's degree. And not because they grew up with silver spoons in their mouth, but because they worked, and they focused, and they sacrificed so that they could be in a position of influence, not of authority or not of power, but in a position of influence. And they went to the same schools that I did. Different names, but the same public school system. And the reason I preach a lot about education is because my parents only had an 8th grade education. My dad dug ditches, and my mom worked in a factory. And because I knew I didn't want that for myself, education was the rescue for me. We don't teach today, and I'll get to the main part about law enforcement in just a second, but this is all relative in my opinion. We don't teach our children today the way that some of the adults in the room learn for critical analysis. What we teach are how to answer questions, and then when our young people get to the workplace, they say, where's the Scantron? I need to answer the question. There is no Scantron. There's only the problem of life and the problem of the corporation that wants you to solve that, and we're absent those critical thinking skills. And why? Because back in the day, in my opinion, you could have a generalist as a teacher who spoke to a single modality. The vast majority of us are visual learners. But what about the auditory learner? Or the learner who uses manipulatives? Or the person who struggles just a little bit? Mainstream public school systems are not equipped to deal with those young men and women. And it goes to Dr. Walsh's part and to Brenda's part with the fact of frustration leads to violence, and violence leads to desperation, and on and on and on. I have my degree from the United States Naval Postgraduate School in security studies. It's a nice way of saying it's in terrorism. But if you want to talk about terrorism or tribalism or gangs, I will tell you that the common thread that joins the three is a lack of hope and a lack of an inability for our young people to dream. And why? Because we tell them every day that they can't make it. And how do we do that? With one of the most sinister devices, in my opinion, that mankind has ever invented, the television set. And now with reality TV, we show how to beat on women, how to spat on women, how to disrespect one another, 24 hours, 365, and if that's not enough for you on general TV, you can actually pay DirecTV to have it just piped right in your house. So rather than looking historical about the great leaders in our world and social leaders like Martin Luther King or many of the others, Joseph Mandela or Sister Teresa, and we could go on and on and on. Rather than looking at them, what do? We chase zombies at 10 o'clock at night. And why? Because that's the game that we know will get us an extra score or an extra life in video practice. The reality is simply this, is that when law enforcement comes involved with the young people's lives, it's because society has failed that young person. Church has failed. School has failed. The parent has failed. I talk with parents all the time, and it's an epiphany when the parents hear me say, you are not your child's friend. You are your child's parent. And at the end of the day, it is your responsibility. It's not the church's responsibility. It's not the school's responsibility. It's not law enforcement's responsibility to make sure that your son gets back and forth to the place they need to go. That's the parent's responsibility. And what particularly about men in color, whether you're African American or you're Latino, what's the problem there? Is that most parents get you to that middle kind of age where you're 13, 14, 15, and they check out. Why? Because the young man has demonstrated all the great things that the parent wants them to do, so they figure they're on their way and going. My son's 25 years old. He's about ready to graduate from United States Army boot camp. And I still write letters every day to my son to tell him how much I love him. Every day. I tell my son how much I love him. And I tell my daughters, my twin daughters who are 34 now, every day how much I love them, and my youngest son as well. And why? Because even though they are older now, they could not have possibly experienced the things that I did when I was a young man. And why? Because I sheltered them from that. Because I was a helicopter parent. I hovered over my child everywhere they went. Not to the point that I extinguished their hopes or their dreams, but to the point that I could stay involved, engaged. And I'll tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, my children are not perfect. My children are not perfect, and neither was I. So how does law enforcement get involved in this whole thing? We have failed in some respect as recent as the last few years in our efforts for enforcement. We don't have to turn the pages of history too far back to look at the Boston Gun Project. Brenda, in 1980, when you look at the exponential growth in youth homicides, what did we have in 80? We had parents that didn't understand the rhythm method, so we had a lot of children. We also had an exponential growth in class 1 narcotics, rock, cocaine, and we had an exponential growth in possession of firearms. And those three components alone in Boston brought the highest death rate in the nation. Deputy Chief Darrell Qualls and John Perez traveled back to Boston to try to figure it out. Pasadena already had an inkling of what it was going to do. But we traveled back in those days because we didn't exactly know what that was. And so what did the Boston Police Department do? The Boston Police Department said, oh, this is pretty simple. If you're a young man of color, particularly black, then it's clear you're a gang member and you have a gun. So what did they tell homogenized Boston PD? Go out and stop every young black man and you will surely recover a gun. And what did they do? They recovered less than 1% firearms in the totality of the stops they made. And so they stopped all the good people in Boston, and all they did was alienate mainstream black America in Boston. A failure. And so we've learned from those kinds of things, and moving forward, we've designed philosophies in law enforcement known as PI, prevention, intervention, and enforcement. And enforcement is at the third rung for a reason. I don't believe that the issues that face Pasadena Police Department or face our great community today are going to be addressed by arrests. Here's the reality. In this fiscal year, 600 judicial officers are going to lose their job. Lawyers, judges, defense counsel, clerks, you name it, they're not going to be here. That process has already started. The judicial system, if you thought it was broke before, stand by. We have young men and women now who are put into the judicial system because there's not an alternative. But I'm proud to tell you in Pasadena there's one. It's called the Youth Accountability Board. It's built on restorative justice concept. And when a young person makes a mistake, rather than putting that person in the judicial system so they can be marked as a felon or some other type of labeling, that person is put into counseling with our partners through Pacific Clinics. They marry up with a mentor. They graduate from the program. It's an arduous program. There's a lot of work, but they have the self-confidence and knowledge that they can make it through a program. And so they feel better with themselves. And we have a very low recidivism rate in that program, but it doesn't stop there. We reach out to our partners over at Muir and Tecumseh and the work that he does, or Rickey Pickens at Flint Ridge Center. I can tell you about the programs of Mentors in Motion or Youth of Promise, where police officers and firefighters are mentors, and we could go on and on and on about those kinds of great programs that work. It's one part of the puzzle. It's not the end state. At the end of the day, though, if we don't come together as a community, if we don't put our children first and create the opportunity and the understanding and couple it with responsibility, because like I told a young man this morning when I was meeting with him, we can't want it more than you. Your mom can't want it more than you. But what we can do is set the stage for our young people to be successful. I was sharing with one of our town council members in Altadena just a moment ago. If a young man or a young lady is 16 today, in 2 years, they will join the body between 18 and the group of young people between 18 and 25. And guess what? They represent the largest voting bloc in America. They will determine whether you have Social Security or Medi-Cal or Medicare or whether you live on the street as a homeless person, because they will have the voting power. What an ominous responsibility. And adults, our job is to help empower them so they understand the authority that comes with voting and the responsibility that comes to be an engaged, mature adult. Thank you.
I'm gonna mess up your first name, but I'm gonna try and say it. Tecumseh?
Tecumseh.
Tecumseh. Okay, Shackelford. We'll speak now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was just talking to my staff, or we was talking the other week, and we was trying to figure out what is the problem with some of our young men. And we found out that we need to change the culture of our kids. They're not thinking right as far as, how to do their studies and how to follow, instructions and things like that. So we decided we were gonna start having meetings with the parents and see can we start there and see can we get some change. Because I was talking to one, and I'll tell you about what our program does too, just a little bit, is that every day at lunchtime, we have the chief, we have Rickey, we have different people that come over and talk about 40 young men every day, Monday through Friday at Germantown High School. That's what we do. They talk about different things. Subject you just heard them talk about now. And that's what we're trying to put in. We're not perfect because within the past 5 years, I've lost 3 of our young men to gang violence. And that really do hurt, you know. That hurts us so bad. That I know we can't save everybody. Somebody said just save one. But we try to do more than that in saving them. But we do talk to them, and we have special people to talk to them and everything. I was talking to one of my staff today, and he was talking about, we got him a job with us in 2009, and he was talking about what helped him, because he had a family member that was in gangs. And so naturally, they was trying to pull him in. But with the help of us finding him a job, working with him every day, he's able to be successful today in his life. Matter of fact, I nominated him for an award today, and hopefully he'll get it, because he's become a real man now since 2009. Some of the other things that we was talking about, like we deal with this on a daily basis. I got one of my kids now. We was trying to save that kid. You know, I even had one of your officers helping me and everything. And the kid, and Rickey talks about this all the time, you don't have to be a gang member, you can live around it. And where that kid lived, when he walk out the door, they would say, hey, blood, every day. Now, we was trying to save him, but we wasn't able to. You know, I had the officers go over there and talk to him when they tried to pull him into the gang and everything. So right today now, that kid, he's in jail right now for burglary. And what I found out again today too, and you know, we talk about this every day. It's an everyday thing that we talk about with these young people. Today I was telling him, I said, well, you know, we got to try to help him some type of way. Because I'm not saying we feel we did the best we could, you know. And so one of the staff was saying, out of all the people, all the young men that he knows, 10 of them is in jail for burglarizing. And that's what our young men have started doing now, is burglarizing. And they go to jail for that. And that's what's going on. We talk to them. What we did a couple years ago is that about 3 years ago, we asked Mike and Tonovich to help us with jobs, because we had lost some jobs up at the Lincoln Crossing. And so the supervisor was able to get hire 29 young men off the street. Because they come to me and they say, well, look, Shaq, if you don't get me no job, I'm going to go out and sell a $10 bag. Okay? Now, that's a true fact, ladies and gentlemen. But now, I got him a job, though. I did. I did get him a job because I know the pressure that he was under. You know, he just told me the pressure he was under. His gang people are going to have him selling drugs if I didn't find him a job. So we was able to help him that way. When the supervisor got his job and hooked us up with archdiatrists, that was the whole idea. And I know jobs is not the solution to everything, but it's a big help, ladies and gentlemen. I'm gonna tell you, it's a big help. And I feel sometimes, you know, we go out, we go to different places and ask people will they hire, but we still need to train our young people on how to be responsible. And that's one of the things that we're doing, and we need more help on doing that. You know, so this get because I talk this is an everyday thing with us, and we're trying to save lives, and it becomes 2 years ago, about 3 years ago, the archdiatrists helped us with when President Obama had all this money that he was putting into the cities and things like that. And we was able to get like 200 jobs for young people here in Pasadena, just the MPYD program, because that's what, you know, that's what it's about. And we need to come up with some more jobs and figure out how to get our job. I know PUSD has a good program going now where everybody they vendors that working for them, they are asking them to give some intern jobs right now. And so we have a couple of our boys, Ron Carter's working on that, and we have a couple of our boys now that's in internship. And we're trying to get more of them, and that's what PUSD is doing. And that's how we need to do it. I'm just a job person. And you know, because if they don't have jobs, they're gonna sit around and they can't help from thinking to do something. That's you know, that's what it is. And you got a friend that's you might just have one friend that's telling you the wrong thing. And it's so easy for them to go into that, to do the wrong thing, and we're trying to help them on that. So I just want to say thank you for inviting me, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I'm going to take this opportunity to open it up to our audience for questions, comments that anybody might have as they want to share. Yes.
Hi, I'm Nora, and thank you guys for today. I just wanted to ask with regard to the men's group that you have over at Muir, how did you get them to come to the group? You said that it's every single day?
Yes, we will call his secretary and give her a time that we have available, and he'll come back and he'll tell us, okay, I'll be over at that time. We did the same thing to Dr. Walsh. We just called people and asked them would they come over and be a guest speaker, and we tell them that, you know, the young men, we have about 40 young men, and let me explain about 40 young men. They don't have to come there for lunch and listen to the speakers. They do that on their own, because everybody said, well, they just come for a burger or whatever, but they listen. Yes, they absolutely listen. So we just started calling people. Lola Osborne is the lady that sets up, sets up the people to call and set up to come down and speak. And we, you know, and that's what we do. That's how we do it.
And you didn't have, so are they coming there, are they building interest in returning to these conversations with you guys and building a community there, bonding with the other kids?
Yes, yes, they should. That's what they do.
I sure wish I would do that at Elliott. Really?
So, if I can, Shaq, as a speaker, I'd like to offer my perspective. One of the more profound perspectives that I have is that when they have people, adults that engage the young men, I think Brenda said it earlier, that it had to be culturally relevant. When they see Dr. Walsh speak, hear him speak, and see him speak, they get it. Man, I can be like that. You know, when they see a Latino speak, they say, I can do that. And these young people are so smart and bright, they just want the opportunity to prove that.
Is it both Latin and black kids?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Actually, when I went, there's even one or two white kids.
Say it again, so.
We are diversified, you know, we invite everyone in, into our program, and a lot of them like to take advantage of it. And I want to tell you this too. This year, the church has decided to help me. I've been begging them for years, okay? So I have about 54 men on that, that's listed. I sent out email to them. All of them is not one-on-one mentors. A lot of them is basically group mentors. I have about 9 of them that's out of that group is one-on-one. Because we're looking for more male to be mentors, and especially one-on-one.